Hi. I am really excited to today to have Martha Armstrong here. I'm going to introduce to you Daphne Minkov, who's going to introduce Martha Armstrong. But before we do that, I'm going to do a screen share and do the land acknowledgement. I always think, okay. So on behalf of North Seattle College, we acknowledge that we occupy the traditional ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Duwamish tribe, a people that are still here, continuing to honor and bring to light their ancient heritage. Without them, we would not have access to this gathering, dialogue, and learning space. We ask that we take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land who are still here. Thank you. Okay, so just very quickly, I want to introduce Daphne Minkov, who is a painter in Seattle. She shows at Linda Hodges Gallery, and she teaches at North Seattle College. She teaches painting. So take it away, Daphne.
Thanks, Amanda. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I was fortunate to have Martha as a painting professor in the summer of 1988, going into my senior year of college at ComSet, a summer painting program through Queens College, and then as my painting professor my senior year at Indiana University. Okay, and I see you all doing the math, so you need to stop. In addition to teaching at IU, she has taught at the Kansas City Art Institute, Smith College, Mount Holyoke, Dartmouth, Haverford Colleges, and as a graduate critic at Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. Here is an extremely abbreviated list of some of her accomplishments. Seriously, the hard copy was 15 pages, double-sided, very small print. I abbreviate because I seek to maximize the time she has to speak with us. For a complete look, check out the link I will post in the chat for you. Her career is as impressive as any living American artist. Martha studied at the Cincinnati Art Academy, Smith College, and Rhode Island School of Design. She's had many one-person and group shows in the United States and Italy. She's received grants from Smith College, a residency at Hollins University, and at the Camargo Foundation in France, and was a visiting artist at the American Academy in Rome. She is represented by galleries all along the East Coast, including the Bowery Gallery in New York City. Her work is in many public collections in universities and museums, including Allentown Art Museum in Allentown, Pennsylvania, Signum Museum and Art Collection in Philly, Haverford College Fine Art Collection, Smith College Museum of Art, and the Woodmere Art Museum in Philadelphia. So there is an interview that Martha did with Larry Groff on the website Painting Perceptions, and I will also type this link into the chat. At the end of the interview, there is a list of Martha quotes, and I'd like to share just a couple with you. When I look at paintings, I'm looking for something real, something to hold you down to earth. I'm looking for connections. Each piece of painting should bear significance like the words of a poem, resonant, signaling. So this is just a sampling of Martha's golden nuggets of wisdom, and it gives you some insight into her approach to teaching. Martha is the kind of teacher and mentor who is generous with her knowledge, love, and enthusiasm for this absurd thing called painting. She was and continues to be for many of her students someone who asks hard questions and provides no easy answers. With compassion, she encourages those lucky enough to study with her to keep at it until they push through or simply make such an awful mess they should probably turn it towards the wall for a bit. But most importantly for me, she believed that the work I was making had integrity and grit. She believed in me when I had no way of seeing my own potential or abilities. She is who I try to emulate and channel with my own students. More than her impressive resume and her accomplishments as a painter, Martha is a truly gifted educator, a teacher who has impacted hundreds, if not thousands of us during her career. In fact, she is so beloved that when word got out of her talk at North, many of her former students asked to be included. Many of them are on the call today. So it is with great honor, respect, and love that I now introduce Martha Armstrong.
Oh, Daphne, that was lovely. Thank you, Daphne. That was just incredible. Ears burning. I'm very impressed with this audience. I think I've spent most of my time just trying to learn to use Zoom. So I hope I have something here to look at. This was a space that showed up. So I just decided to fill it with something in my backyard, which is, there's this thing in the backyard called a meander. And I thought when I moved here, well, I will just fill it in and I'll use the fields behind it, but it looks full of water now. It isn't always full of water. It isn't full of water now. It looks full of water in this picture, but I've seen an incredible number of animals come across that field, across the water, from fisher cats to all kinds of other wild animals that there's a woods that we live on a piece of land that's shaped like a pencil. And if the eraser is where the house and the barn are. And the rest of it is just this huge, long piece of land that is mostly wetlands. So nobody can go back there and build, or so it just stays empty and full of incredible animals. But anyway, that's just painting number one. I was just going to talk about painters who interest me, who've influenced me tremendously. And one is David Park. This is, there's a big show of his work at the San Francisco Museum right now, which I wish I could get to. His paintings always make me feel like I've just been through some really physical, spiritual experience when I go into an exhibit of his work. I think that I used to think his figures were a little bit dehumanized, but I think that's a ridiculous assumption on my part. I think that the way he puts figures in a landscape and makes the landscape and the figures one is really extraordinary. The way he uses paint. This is a figure, a little painting that I did from going to a museum and taking a photograph of something I saw and going home and wanting to paint it, wanting to see it. I don't think you see something until you've tried to paint it. And I spent a lot of my very young life dancing. And I think that the teacher I had, who had come from Germany after World War II, probably the most significant teacher I ever had. And I love what you said, Daphne. I think what she taught me was she loved dance so much. It was so important to her that she wanted everybody to dance, just everybody, and to love it as much as she did. And I sort of feel that way about painting. But I love the form. Look at the form in this ancient figure. I don't know where it's from. Matisse has always been a favorite painter. And again, a painter I had a lot of issues with in high school. I just thought they seemed too casual, too off the cuff, not serious enough. And I couldn't have been farther wrong. I think that he is one of the great 20th century painters. I mean, he's just accomplished so much. And he was told quite young that since he was really studying to be a lawyer, that he'd never make it. He's missed all those years of art school and he just would never make it. But maybe that's a good thing, This is a painting that's in the Phillips collection in Washington. And so it's a painting that's, at least in this country, you can see it. I love the way he put this together. Like there's this still life, and then there's this big piece of African fabric. And then there's this pattern of the tree outside a window that's so simple and yet is so complicated at the same time. This is his greatest rival, Picasso. John Elderfield did an exhibit at the Museum of Modern Art called Picasso and Matisse, which is one of the greatest exhibits I've ever seen. Great catalog for it. And they obviously were looking at each other and watching each other all the time, and felt the competition between the two of them. And I think this is one of my favorite Picassos because it comes from the late Cubist, synthetic Cubist period, where he's using a lot of color and putting things together in an almost collage-like way. And it also has a face in it. You know, it's always struck me as it looks like it has a Chao Chie face in it that you see on ancient Chinese bronzes, that Chao Chie was supposed to be an evil spirit, one of the four great evil spirits. And I don't know that, I mean, Picasso is certainly, that would be typical of him to use that, wouldn't it? I don't know that he did that intentionally, but it's not unusual to suddenly see a face in somebody's painting, the way they put it together. I think we're always looking for that face that we saw in infancy. Manet's always been a painter I look at a lot. This is a most improbable painting. This woman sitting here with no clothes and this sort of cornucopia still life sitting next to her, and these two men formally dressed, probably discussing Proust or something. Then the other woman is in the water, which is just completely improbable. But the thing that interests me about, this is about Manet, is that he was very good friends with one of the great photographers in the 1900s, or the 19th century, 1800s. And when a graduate student at Berkeley wrote her dissertation on Manet using photographs for his paintings, the art world came down on her to the point where she had to disown really what she did. It was not until recently that it has been written about very, very firmly that Manet used lots of photographs. Apparently Delacroix had a dinner party one night and wanted to discuss using photographs in painting. It's still a question. I mean, there's still an argument about using photographs, but I think it's much more acceptable to use just about anything in painting. But this, whoops, how did I missed a painting here. Never mind, we'll just forget that. So one of my favorite places to paint, which we were talking about earlier, is Vermont, especially this time of year. And this is a painting from Vermont, that little hut there, which somebody built who was a ceramist who was renting our cottage up there. I've painted over and over again. I think, well, there's the image that I wanted. That's the other Manet. And this was done from a photograph. I mean, this woman's walking out of a doorway. She's eating cherries. She's a street singer. That's what it's called, the street singer. And she's carrying her guitar and she's eating the cherries. It's a very sort of off the cuff picture, the kind of thing you pick up in a photograph. And if you start, I gave a talk once at the Smith Faculty Club on a painting that's in the Smith Museum, which is a great museum if you ever are in Northampton, of a woman who was sitting with her hands on her head and in sort of a negligee, very inappropriate dress for then. She was the daughter of the Spanish ambassador. And I said, I think that Manet may have used a photograph to do this painting, which it seemed to me it was so quickly done that I doubted that she posed for him like that. And yet he could have gotten a photograph of her. And I think it was sort of scandalously received for a number of reasons. But I've always loved that painting. It's a crazy painting. I mean, so slapdash that it feels like, did he ever look what he was doing? I mean, it's kind of questionable. But nevertheless, it has come out that he did most of his paintings from photographs that he got from a friend of his who was a photographer. So wait a minute, we're going to go back to something else that got messed up here. That's just a Vermont painting. You're going to see lots of them. The last painter I wanted to talk about is Poussin, Nicolas Poussin, who's 1600s. This is St. John on Patmos. It's a most extraordinary pose that St. John is in. He supposedly wrote Revelations, he is the John of the Gospels. I haven't read anything that clarifies that, but either way. But I think Poussin is, again, when I was younger, I thought he was extremely boring. And I saw a big Poussin show in London once, and I spent the whole vacation drawing in this museum, drawing from his paintings. And I think that he's an incredible draftsman. And I don't know. Did I ever tell any of you to draw from Poussin? Maybe I did. Anyway, I've done a lot of collages. I had my first studio in Ardmore, Pennsylvania, because I needed to get out of the house. Growing children, you sometimes feel like you need to have your own space, a room of one's own. It's interesting. My granddaughter just read that in college. And I had one room where I took old drawings, things that I had done that I didn't like, that I either should ditch or resurrect in some way. And I started doing collages, which I sure influenced my painting more than anything else I did. I had this one room, and that's all I did in that room. And the next room had a great view of an automobile repair shop. And I used to go in there and paint what I was looking at out the window. But these collages were very important. And there's a collage exhibit that Bowery Gallery has up on Instagram right now. This is a big painting in Vermont. Again, most of the paintings sort of like this are 48 by 60, and I do them outside. I have a deck, you can see the railing there. I put a piece of canvas down on a big piece of plywood on a picnic table, and I did a lot of paintings that way. I could staple the canvas down because otherwise it would blow away. It's windy hillside. And then I can work on them in my studio, but most of the work is there. It's outside. So, and this is one sort of done out of my head just to kind of construct the space in some way. And again, I see the influence of collage after all. I do lots and lots and lots of small studies, just often unstretched canvas, because I don't know quite where it's going to go or how big it's going to be. And I like the improvisation of just throwing something down in response to what you're looking at. How do you grab that? The light's going to change. It's going to be a different painting in 15 minutes. So I do lots of small studies like this. I got started doing them when my children were very young, and I'd suddenly get a sitter and I'd have 15 minutes to decide what I was going to do. And if I didn't have something stretched, I would just take scraps of canvas. And I used to think, that's pretty lax. I really ought to get myself together and stretch more canvases. But I finally decided it was a very good idea. Another Vermont painting. And another Vermont painting. And I won't go back to this subject until the very end, but it's a continuum. We've had this place in Vermont since 1968, and I've painted there since then. And it's one of my favorite places to paint, largely because I love the landscape. But also it absolutely involves nobody interrupting me, because I feel like once I start on a painting, that's another story. Let's see. John Elderfield, I sat next to him once at the American Academy, and he was telling me that Diebenkorn said, you have to do a painting in one sitting or in one session, that's the way you do a painting. You do the painting in one session. And I thought, good grief. That discounts most of what I do. I mean, how am I going to argue with this man who has absolute authority from Richard Diebenkorn that you do a painting in one session. But there are paintings that do happen that way. And maybe, but most of them don't. And maybe revisionism isn't the best thing to do, but I have fought with that argument from Elderfield ever since. I didn't have a good answer at the time. So in wintertime, when I can't be outside to paint, I do still lifes, and I'm about to do a small catalog of still lifes, which I started doing. I've done them off and on, but it hasn't been my subject. I think I mostly wanted to get out of the house when I was younger, and somewhere just up the street, even drive up the street in the car and work in the car, which I often did. But we went to Hungary one Christmas because my daughter and her family were living in Budapest for a couple of years. And I came back and I'd had a show in Philadelphia, and I had to have a show by March in New York at Bowery. And I didn't have any idea what I was going to do. And I got up at 2:00 every morning and started walking around the house trying to figure out what I was going to do. And one morning the sun started coming up, and I thought, well, I have to start somewhere. I'll just start with what's on the kitchen table. And it led to a whole series of paintings that I showed then, and I did them again on primed canvas, but not stretched canvas. And I would start over here on the right where the sun was coming in here. And then I just keep painting to the start over here on the left, and then I'd go paint toward the right. And this is where the sun is coming by the time I got to this side of the painting. So this bowl is this bowl. Whoops, I didn't mean that to happen. And this bowl is this bowl. And trying to make a composition out of it. It was I don't know, I figured Cubism must be something like that. This is another painting, same, there's snow outside. And here is this cup when the light first comes in way over here, and I had to get that. So I got that, and then I'm moving over, and this cup is not in the light anymore. The light's over here as it moves across. You know, it's going like this, sort of over the landscape, and shining in this window in different angles. So this painting I called Triple Valentine. I was about ready to send my granddaughter a Valentine in Hungary, and it was sitting there, and I thought, gotta grab that. And then the light was coming in here, and the light is over here now, and the Valentine is out of the light. And then this is the last little piece of light and the last little piece of Valentine. So that's why I called it Triple Valentine. It's an interesting thing to try, you know. You have no idea where the composition is going. This is the same subject, but not done in multiples. This is a large painting from Kansas City, and not a good slide, but I thought it was, I started painting this view out of my apartment on Warwick Avenue. And there were all these buildings down here. And I started doing a lot of small studies of this particular piece of this landscape, but this was trying to put the whole thing together at once. And it's, again, 48 by 60. This is a drawing. I do lots of charcoal drawings, and here is that piece of the painting. And this is a study, one shot study of that piece of the painting, just trying to put that together. I went back to Philadelphia, and this is 9th and Spring Garden. You know, Amanda must know where that is. There's a lot of there are a lot of studios there full of artists. And most of these houses, these buildings down there aren't lived in. they're really abandoned houses. I was never sure I'd have hubcaps on my Volkswagen bus when I got out of my studio. It was that kind of neighborhood. It was waiting to be taken over for something else. This is a fairly large painting, and this is on the other side of the building where you can see the Ben Franklin Bridge. And this is a third painting. It's about 72 inches tall. There's the Enquirer building, and these are all the buildings between me and that landmark in Philadelphia. Then there was a place that I could go out and paint a deserted peach orchard on a piece of what was Harridan. I mean, Harridan High School was built on half of this estate that came from William Penn, and the family still lived in the other half of the landscape in this piece of land. But they invited me to come and paint there, which I did for many years, because this is early 70s, and this is maybe 10 years later. I was still going there to paint. Another collage. These were pieces of painted canvas that I'd put together. This is a summer that we as a family were going to spend in London, and my children got jobs in the Pen Club, which is a sort of Quaker hostel in Bloomsbury. And I met this woman at an opening at the Print Club in Philadelphia who wanted to rent her apartment. So I rented her apartment in the East End, and it had wonderful views. This is the Thames back here. So that's water. And I did a lot of paintings of lorries that would come in and out of this it's working class neighborhood. In fact, they thought that the United States was responsible for most of it getting bombed in World War II. I was not a welcome neighbor, but I didn't take it personally. This is Bloomington, for those of you who recognize Bloomington. And I love the fact that in this one little view from my backyard, here's a grain elevator and this heating pipe and billboards and railroad crossing. I thought that was cool. And this is a study. I did lots of studies of this landscape. And then there were quarries there, which don't have the romance that they purported to have in Breaking Away, the movie, if you've seen it, or maybe it's so far gone that you've never heard of it. But the quarries were a great place to go and paint because it looked like a ruin. There are all these pieces, big chunks of limestone that were lying around, and then these pools of water that were colored the most bizarre tints of blue and greens because they were so chemically polluted. And people would come there and throw their refrigerators in the quarries, and they would drown their extra puppies in the quarries. And I often would have somebody come and do target practice next to me, which I would try to then encourage them to maybe just move a few more feet away from me because it was unnerving to have somebody doing target practice. But I loved painting there. I thought it was a great place to paint. My children were in college at this point, so I started painting people. I think I just was lonely for company and started painting. And Beth, you must remember this. You must remember this pose.
Oh, I do. Oh, wow. Yes, I enjoyed so much modeling for you because just the conversation was wonderful. Yes.
Wow, that's great. This student, I came home from lunch one day and she had taken over this pose. Beth, I think, started it. I had a really good painting of you in this, but a completely different angle. And she had quite a life story, and she was actually back on her feet and doing really well, this woman. And I came home for lunch And I thought the painting needs something coming straight out of it. It's all going side to side. So I painted this snake in it, and I was sure I would come back in the evening and paint it out, but I never did. I thought it really belonged there. In many ways, it belonged there. This is a painting of my husband posing in my studio reading the travels of Marco Polo. He later wrote a book called Looking for Marco Polo for kids about the journey of Marco Polo. And I'm trying to write something. I was interested in your introduction about the Indians in the place where you are in Seattle. I'm trying to write something about the Iroquois for my granddaughter, which has led me to extensive research about how it was that, the Christopher Columbus came to North America. And it just, I just want you to know that Christopher Columbus had a copy of the travels of Marco Polo, which he had annotated, and it's in the museum in Cadiz in Spain. I mean, I just thought you should know that. Marco Polo was an extremely popular traveler at one point for fellow travelers, people who were trying to figure out how to move around the world. So anyway, so Alan wrote this book on the travels of Marco Polo, and that's the way the sun looks in the wintertime to me in our backyard. And this is from Cassis, where we went on a Camargo grant, and I painted out of my room because my studio, which was lovely, but it had one window that faced a wall that was a few feet away from it, a tall wall. I mean, that was it. That was the view. So I painted, I'm always going to paint what's out the window, I guess, and that's, or the landscape. And so that's the view that I had, but the Camargo Foundation people did not like that I was painting up there. So they gave me another apartment that was empty to paint out of, which was very nice. I mean, it was, I don't think they trusted my being there, that they thought I was going to somehow paint the walls or something, but it was a great place to paint. Here's my husband reading. He'll always pose if he can read. This is the Camargo Foundation right here. And that's the Mediterranean back there. It's a great place to paint. He's still my favorite model. Here is a robe that we found in the basement in a house in Brattleboro, Vermont, where Alan was the executor of this estate. And it was a big old house, and the grandfather had done a lot of traveling. And there were many beautiful rugs that had been eaten to smithereens. But this was a piece of silk of a robe that wasn't finished. It was full of rusty pins, safety, straight pins, and beautiful silk. So I just had to have it for a while and paint it. This is maybe 66 inches tall, I think. And again, a winter landscape, and this beautiful piece of silk. And that the inside, this is the inside of the robe. And then I did lots of drawings trying to decide how I was going to paint it. This is from a visiting artist position at Deep Springs College. I don't know if any of you have heard of Deep Springs College. It's in Bishop, California, and it's usually takes boys from high schools where they're not doing as well as people think they should be doing, and they run the school. They run a farm and they run the school. And girls, I think there's the first class of girls added to the school 2 years ago. So it's an interesting place, and it was an interesting place to just go and paint. Right back here, there was a mountain lion just racing across this field. It's a pretty wild place. My car was right behind me. It was did not feel threatened, but it was interesting to see this big animal. This is from Hollins College. That was a wonderful experience teaching there. I had a great studio that Jack Beale had right before me, and he had painted out all the windows. You couldn't see out of the windows. They were painted and covered with paper so that there would be no light coming in. Well, I changed that, but mostly I went outside and painted. And this is a big painting that Alan posed for from the other side of the building. And this was a new library that they had built, which people thought did not fit into this campus at all. But I thought it was pretty nice back there. I liked that. Looked startling form back there, Alan. This is now Holland's started a January program in Italy, and I went to teach J term the first time I went to Italy. We did it, I think, twice, but then I went back to teach for the school that was running the J term, the January term. This is the Tiber River, and these are the fields, all about, you're up on a hill, and the fields, I painted these fields over and over and over again, and they're so beautifully laid out. They're so beautifully organized. There are lots of straight lines in them now because we have modern machinery, but I think that people have been farming here from the time of the Etruscans, and it's amazing how well cared for the land is and how productive it is to this day. These are the Sibylline Mountains in the back. And this is about the same size painting, but the sun hitting it late in the afternoon. And this is a painting that where you're way up on these ramparts in Monte Castello di Vibio, which is where the school was. And that is Todi over there. It's a city between Perugia and Rome, or Perugia and Florence. But this is a little town, and it was high enough up so you got these marvelous views. This is from being a visiting artist at the American Academy in Rome, and I went there with a proposal to do paintings of figures. I'd go down. I wanted always to go down and take drawing materials and take my cell phone and make images of sculptures like that incredible boxer in one of the Capitoline museums that I just thought I would just love to be able to stand there and paint that figure. But but my room had these incredible views, so I never did it. I never did paint them. This is that's one of the studios for somebody who wins a Prix de Rome, which has no windows. No, it has a big skylight. That's a skylight. I thought I was so much luckier to be up on the fourth floor, or maybe the third floor, looking at this view of Rome. I mean, here's the Pantheon back here, and these old churches in the city. And this is a more modern building called the Villa Caraviglia. That's that building. But here again is the Pantheon. You see this, it collapses the whole plain of Rome to be up there on that hill, the Janiculum. And great place to paint, but there's so much going on there that it's extremely distracting to try to paint there. I know people have had Prix de Romes and who just don't get any work done there because there's so many interesting speakers that come there and events that are happening that you're torn. You can't just say, well, I'm going to skip dinner tonight, because somebody interesting is going to be there. This is a year I spent teaching at Haverford College, and I did a series of porch paintings because this porch was right off our living room, and it became my subject for the winter. This is back in Vermont. These are 2 trees in my side yard in the spring. And our son lives in Tucson, so I've started painting in Tucson. That's where I last saw Daphne. And she came to visit there. And this is a morning painting. And the desert is just such a different subject. I'm absolutely fascinated to start trying to grow things there and to deal with the skies, because it's mostly skies that you're dealing with. And this is the sunset. I made sort of patterns and laid them down there because I didn't get these lines to do what I wanted them to do freehand. So I made the ribbons out of paper and cardboard and drew them and then painted them in so that I could get these. I mean, the painting was finished, I thought. And then I thought, no, I have to put something in the sky to make it move. Whoops. And so that's how I did that. It feels like I just put this together over many different days, which I did. So there, John Elderfield. This is a drawing of the other side of the house. And the house was under evacuation orders this summer because of fires, because lightning strike up here on the mountains started burning right down the hillside. And we were all told to evacuate. But fortunately, the wind changed, went another direction. And I don't think there was any real damage done by that particular fire, but it is a problem for us now, these fires, no question. This is, again, these two trees, which really became very significant. I was out there painting them one day and was trying to work on the sky, and all of a sudden the sky looked like that. It was a mackerel sky that simply took over. I'm fairly high up, so it felt very low over me. And I really became interested in mackerel skies. So I started drawing mackerel skies. Mackerel skies. Now, it won't show any more pictures. Apparently you have to, let's see, what can I do? I'm going to, I think I can show you a couple more images if I can go to the bottom this way, but maybe it's enough. It's enough. Okay, this is going to the ocean, and this spring we had a chance to go over for part of a week and just plop down in the sand and look at the water. And again, I take pieces of just cut canvas and put them on a piece of plywood, because otherwise they'd blow away, and do one-shot paintings. And this is a painting that I just photographed in my studio in Vermont 2 days ago, so I could show you exactly what I'm in the middle of wrestling with right now. So thank you so much. And if you have questions, please ask. What can I do? Stop share?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There you
Okay.
go. And then you can see people on there.
Okay. I'm good.
Okay, I'm gonna go.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. Are there questions? I mean, I've got a million questions, but I'm going to let other people ask questions. And you can just unmute. You don't have to type into the chat.
You can still hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I have a question, or just more. One of the things that kind of stuck with me that you spoke about when I was a student at Indiana was about the nature of like American landscape, and kind of like the way you spoke about it. There was like a kind of like a scruffy, kind of messy beauty to it. And I don't know where we had that conversation, but could you speak about that a little bit? About the nature of American landscape that you kind of were working on at that time?
I do remember that. And I remember I had lived with an Italian family for a summer in college. And I tried to draw there, and I tried to get, thinking I would love to paint here. I mean, I was so thrilled to go to museums and see paintings that I'd studied in art history. It was a thrilling time, but I couldn't paint it. It was all art already. All the landscape was so formal, and yards and gardens and streets and everything was so laid out. And the Italians are such designers. I mean, there are funny stories about it. Like my husband was trying to mail a box in the local post office. And there were a lot of people ahead of him and they were chatting away. And all of a sudden they turned around and looked at his box. And they came over and they took his box and they went up and demanded materials from the postmistress. And they took his box and they unwrapped it and they rewrapped it properly and then gave it to him to mail. And there's another story that that's coming to mind. The prisoners of war in World War II, when the Germans were guarding the prisoners, they could put together anything and slip out the door and look like and walk down the street. And the Germans never noticed it was a weird costume they had on. But if anything were wrong with it, once the Italians took over and got rid of the Germans, they would immediately spot that that is an escaped prisoner, because look at the way he's put together those clothes. I mean, that's not possible. He should not be wearing that with that. And I think that the Italians are like that. They are just meticulous about design. And I think that I found it overwhelming there as a student. And to be out in Indiana with the billboards and the grain elevators and the railroad crossings, I mean, I just love that. I just love the haphazard quality of the way things are put together. Now, there are issues there, but I think that there is something still wonderful about that, and that's very much an American trait, that we are going to arrange things the way we are going to arrange things. And whether it's a formal arrangement and meets, the standard of the Italians, no, it's not going to. And we're going to do it our own way. And we're each going to do it our own way. And I like that. I think that's wonderfully refreshing here in so many ways. It's kind of symptomatic of a lot of things that we should celebrate as Americans, embrace diversity, among other things. I think that, let me see, where was I going with this? Anyway, that's what I remember about it. Although I've been able to go back and paint in Italy and find myself perfectly comfortable doing it. So I don't know. I have to retract the part of myself that I couldn't do it when I was a student. I gave up. I really was so frustrated. I just decided I'm going to spend my time living with his family and going to museums and, but I gave up trying to work there. It was very, very intimidating, I guess, that it was so orderly. Every tree I saw was planted. Nothing was growing wild. In my apartment, my house in Bloomington, there was a pawpaw tree and it planted itself. And I had neighbors who would come and knock on my door and want to pick all the pawpaws off the pawpaw tree. And when I'd leave my apartment, I would put pawpaw branches around my geraniums and cover them over and come back a month later, and the pawpaws would have rooted. I could have gone out and planted more pawpaws. They're a very vigorous tree, but where do we see them? But wild. Anyway, does that ring true of what you remember? Anyway.
Yes, thank you. It's interesting because I think
another comment about that. I was told recently that Stiglitz insisted that his gallery artists paint outside because he wanted Americans to get in touch with the American landscape and paint the American landscape. He didn't want us to imitate Europeans. Like, I mean, the early painters of the Hudson River School and the wonderful painters like Frederick Church and Thomas Cole and so on, are very formal painters following a very European tradition. And we've gotten a long way from that. I love them. I think they're wonderful painters, but their style and their acceptance of European standards is very different from what we're doing today.
I'm just going to read a couple things from the chat, if that's okay, because I know that you may not have access to that. But one of the things is I also just love your work, and I appreciate the ways in which you talk about it. I also liked how you said in the beginning, when I was young, I thought the figures were dehumanized, or Matisse was ... And then later, I didn't think that at all. So important for us to realize how our ideas can change. And I'm just going to sort of add on to that, because I think it sort of talks to a little bit to, well, you're basically, you know, it's nice to be able to see you, see where you've been and see all of the things that have come out of, you know, the window, you know, painting out the window and that perception. And I'm wondering if that open-mindedness that comes with like, oh, I can look at something that I've said before and change my mind, which a lot of us have a really hard time doing, right? Do you believe that that comes out of this openness to the landscape, or the openness to your surroundings? Weird question, sorry.
Is that a question? Is
Yes,
it a question? I mean,
yeah, it was supposed to be a question. Do you believe that that open-mindedness comes out of the fact that you are open to your surroundings when painting? Like, do you see the correlation in some way? Like, you don't have to answer it also.
well, you know, it's possible, but I think that it's, I mean, I would guess that it's kind of more of an American trait. I went to a wedding in Czechoslovakia many years ago. And a woman who was at the wedding took me to a local art school to see what people were doing. And I was sort of heartsick that they were all sort of copying things and looking at old paintings. I mean, I think you can learn. I think one of my greatest recommendations to students is go to museums and draw. And now you can go to museums and take photos with your camera and your iPhone and take them home and try to draw them. Because it's a tremendous education to see how other people have put paintings together. But it doesn't mean that there are rules. I don't think there are any rules about painting. I really don't. You may have your own rules. I have my own rules for sure, which I can give up at the drop of a hat if they don't work. I often felt teaching is a curious thing. Like you'll go and look at somebody's work and say, oh, this is what you should do. And then you can go in and pick up a paintbrush and make an absolute liar out of yourself, you know, that you're not going to do that. You know, so I'm very skeptical of my own pronouncements about it's this way. It's not. It may be at that moment, but I think you have to stay very flexible. And I think that it's more exciting, but I don't think my work looks like I'm just dashing off from doing this and doing that. I think I have, like, my gallery in Philadelphia wanted to do a catalog, which I sent you all a bunch of. They should have arrived this morning. Did they, Daphne? Maybe. No. Anyway, they're on.
I haven't checked my front porch. Maybe.
There are lots of catalogs and they're called Up to Now. I said, I don't want to call this a retrospective because I don't think of myself as finished. Like I've still got a lot of ground to cover that I'm eager to try. And I was really surprised when it had to be things in my closet. It had to be things for sale. It couldn't be things I was taking back from collections. So everything in there was simply something that I hadn't sold or hadn't finished. And that's what the makeup of that catalog is, which you can all get a copy of it. It should arrive today. But I was surprised that it looked like one person, all those paintings, going back to the 60s. I was surprised that there was some consistency. I was terribly worried that it would just look like the most incredible hodgepodge, just ridiculous. But I was signed on, so that's what it got to be. And I was very happily surprised that I could see relationships between 10-year, 20-year periods. It was very interesting.
Martha, one of the things that that really stayed with me that you talked about all those years ago was this idea that there was this pendulum between abstraction and realism, and you didn't have to be consistent about it.
Right.
And I feel like it really freed me up to be able to explore kind of an idea or an intention, and then turn around and in a way have a different kind of intention, and that there could still be consistency in the work because it comes out of curiosity and your ideas, but it didn't have to look a certain way in this really steady way. And I just thought that was one of the most incredible kind of bits of wisdom,
Well, you just think of what we've been through. I mean, at least for my generation, what we've been through about the conflict between abstraction and representation. I mean, I remember being at Rhode Island School of Design and a teacher saying, well, if you're going to paint it, you might as well paint a lemon. It's going to be a lemon anyway. That's a comment from a teacher. I thought, if you don't paint abstractly, you're on the wrong boat. And I wasn't ready to paint abstractly. I was looking at all kinds of stuff, and I wanted to paint the way I wanted to paint. And I love abstract painting. I spent all my time in college trying to figure out abstract painting. I read Kandinsky's Point and Line to Plane and Mondrian. I love Mondrian. What is it? What is his book called? I can't think of the name of it. I remember reading his comments about plastic form and pure plastic form. I mean, here's a story about Mondrian. He came to New York, and Leland Bell told this story. Leland Bell said he was invited to tea in this apartment that faced out on Central Park. And he was given the seat of honor. He had this view of Central Park. And he fidgeted and fidgeted. And Leland said he finally got up and said, please trade places with me. I can't stand all that green. Just didn't want anything to do with that landscape out there. That he had his ideas about formal structure that he needed to address. And I think if that's what you want to do, then you should do it. That's what his view was. But I think that we've got so much to learn from both sides of that. Some people don't want to look at anything when they're working. They want it coming out of their head. And I am just absolutely intoxicated by looking at things. So I remember having a terrible time learning to listen to a lecturer in college because I'd start painting or drawing on my notebook, something I was in the room, or something about the professor's face or something. I just couldn't focus on listening over seeing. So I was not a very good attendee to large lectures and listening to careful information that I needed to be responsible for. It was a real discipline for me to learn to do that. But I think everybody's different, and you have to find out what you are, and I think it's important to look at both sides. I think everything's abstract and representational, everything.
Woven through the chat, there's a lot about your color. And there are a couple questions that came up at the end, and I'm sure there are earlier ones too, which, sorry if I'm not getting all of them. Are your palette colors influenced by the way the light hits as you are looking out the window, or are there other influences? And then one more, and just in admiration of that, I guess, is also the next one. So.
Well, when I was doing all those collages in this one little room in this studio that I rented, it wasn't a studio, it was a real estate office. I learned a lot about color. I mean, it really was an interesting, what I felt I learned during that time, doing those collages. I mean, I can look at it now and I can see, my gosh, it comes out in all the landscapes, these very sort of cubist forms that came out from cutting up pieces and putting them together. But what I felt I learned at the time and shortly after that period of time was I learned about color, just trying to put pieces together and see what they do to each other. And it might be weeks. I'd have this paper on the floor and I'd be arranging things and rearranging things, and then I'd go and paint. And then the next day I'd come in and I'd look at it and say, no, start over, do something else. And finally, if I couldn't move anything, if it really held together in a certain way, then I'd glue it down with gloss medium. That's the best glue you can find. It's fantastic. You could paint, you can use metal or cardboard or plastic, or you can glue it down. Nothing happens. The paper doesn't shrivel up or anything. It's wonderful. But I felt I learned about color doing that. That was, it was terribly important for me to use color as a tool, as a structure, or as an expressive point, but mainly as a structure, as trying to figure out the structure. If the color doesn't hold the right place in the painting, then the painting loses its sense of connectedness. It's tricky. Yes. Sarah.
I have a question about, I lived in Vermont for a while too. I worked at the Vermont Studio Center, and I always heard the Fisher cat screaming. When you said you had Fisher cats on your land, I was wondering if you'd, what it was like to actually encounter the Fisher cat or spot them, because I saw one. I found the body of a Fisher cat once by the river, but I never saw one. And I was interested in your encounters in the wild, when you're on your land painting, how that might come into play, the animal sightings.
Well, you just as well, you don't really want to encounter a Fisher cat. They're vicious animals. They trap and eat porcupines. I mean, they climb trees. I mean, if you think your cat is going to escape from this animal and climb a tree, the Fisher cat will come right up the tree. They're very aggressive, nasty animals, But I just saw one coming across the field slowly and looking side to side. They're big. Yeah. And I thought, what is that? I'd never seen that animal before. And then I left my studio and started walking down toward it. There's this meander between us, so I felt I was perfectly safe. But it then it just fled across the field. It did not want to deal with me at all. So I just wanted to get a close look at it so I could go look up and see what it was. But I've read enough about them to, they can just decimate porcupines in an area. They're, they're very destructive animals.
They sound
I wouldn't.
I would hear their scream because I lived in a cabin in the woods, and really? I would hear them shrieking. That.
I'm sure it's not a pleasant scream.
It's scary. So I was always very scared of them. After looking them up, they looked like this mythological beast to me.
Well, it's part of our planet. We just have to live and let live.
But I thought that the interesting part of that question was how does it affect like the interactions with these animals affect your work too.
No, wait a minute, say that again, I'm not hearing you. Wait,
Sarah, do you want to restate that?
Yeah, just I was curious if that ever came into the because I remember when I would paint in the landscape in Vermont, I never saw the Fisher cat, but I did have encounters where I saw a weasel or various animals, or the animals of an area, how they come into your painting when you're painting outside. Do you find that to come into the work ever?
if you're standing still outside painting, it's amazing what will come into your territory. Like you're not moving around, you're just standing there. I mean, I've had moose and bears and deer and, you know, and birds wondering, what are you doing? I mean, I'm trying to get my around your feet. What are you doing? Like, hey, move. And it's just because you're standing there, you know, and you're not moving really much. Especially, I used to paint a lot just sitting on the ground. I don't do that as much anymore, but that does really attract a lot of animals. You are sort of a sitting duck, so to speak, because you're not moving around much, so you're not threatening. All I have to do is start moving around, and the bear went right across, took off on 4 legs, you know.
Wow.
They were very nervous about my moving around.
Well,
I'm sorry. Did I answer your question? No. What did?
I enjoyed hearing you talk about also just the grabbing the canvas and stapling. I was thinking a lot about that. I was being questioned earlier by a friend about my process outside, and it's nice to hear other people who just, I feel like maybe that falls into you talking about the American way of, you know, you're not on an easel and working outside and being resourceful and just laying down the plywood on the table. That was nice. It was nice to hear you.
So try say your question
about
again,
that.
because I'm not catching every word, so I'm not.
Oh, well, my question about the animals, I feel like you answered it. I was just making a comment that it was nice to hear you talk about your process about the working on the flat on the plywood, working outside and not working with the French easel or, you know, in a more traditional plein air way.
Well, it's partly adjusting to weather and wind, and you know, if you're by the seashore, it's just it's a fight. You know, I have sand over a lot of those, like that one little painting I showed you. There's sand in that painting. I mean, it just blows. Or you can't have a big canvas set up on a windy day. It's just easier to sort of nail it down to a tabletop to paint on it. But I love painting outside like that. I love being out by myself in the woods painting or on the seashore painting. People usually leave me alone. It's not I don't know. It's a great place to work. I have reflected recently that when I was an undergraduate, I rarely went to my painting class. I would go out in the woods and paint. And it was a disaster for me because when I got to be a senior, I couldn't get those teachers to recommend me for graduate school. And I got A's in their classes, but I think I so insulted my teachers by not going to their classes that and I really didn't know quite what to do about that at that point. It was like I got an art historian to recommend me. Well, that wasn't very helpful. But I don't know. I just had to go my own way, I guess. I couldn't stand in a class with a lot of people talking about all kinds of, I don't know, their latest date or, you know, their problems with this or that or something. And I never let my students do that. And there are 2 of them there will probably tell you. I mean, I wouldn't let them not come to class with their materials and paint, but I also didn't like people coming with earphones. Like I wanted them to listen to what we were talking about in the class. But in other words, as a teacher, I never did that. I never let students do that. But as a student, I did that, and no one stopped me or suggested maybe it's not a very good idea, you know, but that's the way I work as an undergraduate, because I like being off by myself alone to paint. I have friends who stand on street corners in New York City and paint. A lot of them. Stanley Lewis, George Nick. I couldn't anymore do that than fly. I think it's like, for me, I paint very intuitively. So if something comes into my head and I need to follow it, and it's like one note after another note after another note. It's like playing a piece of music, like that piece of, I play the piano, the piece of the painting that you put on the advertisement for this talk is called The Grandmother's Tales, and it's from a Prokofiev piano piece that I heard it and I thought, I have to learn to play that. So I spent 6 months learning to play this piece of music. The only thing I could do was memorize it because it's so complicated. But Prokofiev's Grandmother's Tales just struck me as incredible piece of music that related to ideas of painting that were interesting to me. So that's why I named the painting that. But for me, it is like putting down one note and another note and another note, or, you know, following a series of moves that make complete sense when you're focusing and concentrating on something you're looking at. But it's not that you can't change them, which I do. It's not that you can't change, you know, scrape out a whole area of a painting and do it again. But it's just, I think, the way I work. And so I really need to be alone. If anybody comes and starts talking to me, it's like, you know, like it's building a house of cards and suddenly they crash or something. I'm not good at that. But there are people who are working in a different part of their brain, I think, when they're working on a painting. And I don't know, intuition is my driver for sure. And I have lots of failures. I mean, it just, I know Leonid Lerman is a teacher, maybe, and an artist, some of you may know, but he says, fail harder, fail more, you know, to his students, which is good advice. I mean, then you don't get too discouraged, like, oh, just another failure. Like,
Well, thank you so much for being here. I don't want to cut anything
thank
short.
you so much for asking me. I'm very flattered. Thank you.
I'm going to just stop the recording if that's okay. And then if people want to stay around and ask questions and be in conversation, that can happen. But I'm just going to stop the recording.